Today I just want to speak a little bit about the whole idea of living in the world but not being of the world, because it can be very tricky. But I want to go to a few scriptures and let's start with Luke 19, starting from verse 1. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. Verse 4. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. Verse 9. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. All right, next verse. So Matthew 11 is pretty much Jesus speaking to some people about the religious leaders of the time. If we go to, we're not reading from verse 1, but if we started at verse 1, we would see basically Jesus talking about the fact that John the Baptist was in prison. And, well, let's just read verse 2, verse 3. And when John had heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent two of his disciples and said to him, Are you the coming one, or do we look for another? Jesus answered and said to them, Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, the poor have the gospel preached to them, and blessed is he who is not offended because of me. So, all right. So then Jesus sends the servants off to John the Baptist to relay the message. Look, this man doing things that we never see. This God be the Messiah. But as the servants of John the Baptist return to John the Baptist, Jesus is there speaking to the crowd now. And then he starts to speak about the different people who have heard the gospel but have not received, the message. And he comes all the way down to, let's take it from verse 16. So he's still speaking about the people that he's been preaching to and the bad reception that he's gotten, the doubt, the disrespect, the blasphemous comments being made. He's addressing all of these people and how unbelieving there are, right? And he says, But to what shall I liken this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to their companions and saying, We played the flute for you and you did not dance. We mourned to you and you did not lament. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, Look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And then he goes on to rebuke the impenitent cities, those cities that wouldn't repent. But a few verses I want to focus on here is the verse 18 and 19. For John, talking about John the Baptist, for John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, Look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. All right. These are just a few verses. There's several other verses that could support my point, but let me just jump back to Luke 19 to remind us of what the key verse is, at least for my point here. Going back to verse 6 is really 7 that we want, but going to verse 6 for context. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, He has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Right? This is what the religious people of the time were saying about Jesus when he went to deal with Zacchaeus. Another one that we can look at quickly is Luke chapter 7. Let's go to verse 36. Then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil and stood at her feet behind him weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now when the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. So we have another situation here where the religious people at the time, they were like, because you got to understand, right, that right up to the beginning of the Bible, holiness was always a big issue when it comes to God. God don't play with that holiness thing. And what God did in the early years of the Jewish journey is he emphasized how serious and how strict they needed to be about being holy. And of course, holy has a number of different meanings or connotations. But one of the things we hear is that it refers to being consecrated or separated, being put aside, making a distinction between Jews and Gentiles, making a distinction between clean and unclean, making a distinction between what you can eat and what you can't eat, what you can touch and what you can't touch, right? The Father, through the laws of Moses and so on, always impressed upon the Jews, look, you need to separate yourselves from those of Canaan. You ain't to mix with them. He would say, don't let the men from Israel marry the women across there. We ain't got nothing to do with them, right? Because you can marry them and then the men are going to go astray after the strange gods that these women serve. Left out them. Okay? God used to make a strong, clear separation over and over and over. So the Pharisees, it's no wonder that they had this kind of mentality. So you can't blame them per se. I'm not justifying the Pharisees, but I'm just trying to explain to you where their thinking came from. Peter had the same problem. Acts chapter 10. Jesus sends Peter to go and talk to some Gentiles. Let's look at it real fast. Acts chapter 10. Let's just read from verse 9 real fast. Then the next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up to the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened and an object like a great sheet bound at the 4 corners descending to him and let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, birds of the air. And a voice came to him, Rise, Peter, eat and kill. But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything uncommon or unclean. And a voice spoke to him again the second time, What God has cleansed, you must not call common. This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. Now when Peter wondered within himself what this vision which he had seen meant, behold, men who had been sent from Cornelius, now Cornelius is a Gentile, men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate. And they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodged there. While Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit said to him, Behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise therefore, go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. Then Peter went down to the men who had been sent to him from Cornelius and said, Yes, I am he whom you seek. For what reason have you come? And they said to him, Cornelius the centurion, a just man, one who fears God and has a good reputation among all the nation of the Jews, was divinely instructed by a holy angel to summon you to his house and to hear words from you. Then he invited them and lodged them. On the next day, Peter went away with them, and some brethren from Joppa accompanied him. Now the point is that God had to send that vision to Peter, and he didn't send it once or twice. He had to send it 3 times, because these Jews had ingrained in their minds and in their hearts and their whole upbringing, their whole lives, they're not supposed to deal with certain people. They're not supposed to be interacting with people that are unholy or unclean and that kind of thing. So that's why this guy here is bewildered, because he's sitting and he's saying, this man, okay, I could see why we would call this man a prophet, because he's doing A, he's doing B, he's doing all these different things. But if he was a prophet, he would certainly know that this woman that is touching him, he would certainly know what type of woman this is. All right. So what are we saying here? The thing that I'm trying to bring across to us is we have to have wisdom and judgment and understanding when it comes to how we interact with the people of the world and other people. Okay? Because it is very true that there needs to be a separation between the people of the world and the people of God, right? Jumping quickly down to 2 Corinthians chapter 6:14. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore, come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. So this is a New Testament verse referencing Old Testament verses. But the point that I'm saying is this need or this declaration of God for his children to separate themselves from the world is still true. It's still relevant. It's still applicable to today's day and age. We are still supposed to have a keen awareness of the company that we keep and the unions and the relationships that we allow and that we foster and that we entertain. Right? We're still supposed to be keenly aware of which spouse or woman or man we are talking to from a relationship standpoint, even from a serious friendship standpoint, right? But at the very same time, we need to have the mind of Christ, because Christ was often found among these unbelievers. So we heard about Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a man who was, not so morally upright in his past. But at the time that he was meeting Jesus and he was considering these things, he was in a repentant state. And Jesus was able to recognize that. And Jesus was able to commune with him, invite him to the table, have a discussion with him, commune with him for some degree of time. I don't know how long. And he was able to encourage Zacchaeus and say, look, you get in there. Right? You are allowing, he didn't say all these words, but the idea is that you are being gripped by the gospel. You are allowing God to get hold of you and to change your heart. Because Zacchaeus was about there saying things like, you see, I given half what I have to the poor. That means things that tax collectors don't say, right? That means things that tax collectors say. This was a man that was being revived. This was a man that was being quickened by the Holy Ghost. This was a man that was being called to God. And Jesus was recognizing that. And Jesus was saying, yeah, I can commune with this guy and I can call him, I can encourage him. With the woman in Luke chapter 7, the woman that was a sinner, Jesus recognized, look, this woman is of a repentant heart. She is very aware of her sin. Ain't nobody disputing whether or not she has sin, because Jesus well knew what she was dealing with. But it was evident to Jesus that she was trying her best to show Jesus and to demonstrate to Jesus, look, I know what I am, I know what I've been, but I recognize that in you is the answer. I don't know how to get it out of you, but I just know that you got the answer. And I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing. I look at the righteousness and the holiness that you exhibit, and I admire it, and I want to connect with it. And I don't know what to do, but, I just, the Bible says she cried with her tears and wiped his feet with her hair and so on. She was just trying to show, like, I want to align myself with you. I want to thank you. I want to connect with you, right? I want to show appreciation for for you. I wanna be engaged in your thing. I know who I am. Right? So Jesus, he was able to again commune with her, be in close proximity to her, not to go and interfere with the girl, not to live a sinful situation, but to encourage her up and out of where she was. So the Pharisees looked at it as Jesus is a friend of sinners, a gluttonous fellow and a wine bibber, right? A gluttonous fellow and a wine bibber is just another way of saying a person without any self-control and any self-discipline, a person that's just self-serving, self-gratifying, just drinking all sorts of rum and eating. Not that eating is bad, but it was understood that fasting and living a fasted life, as people call it these days, was the virtuous religious thing to do, right? You temper yourself. And it's not that Jesus didn't temper himself, because I'm sure that none of those guys was fasting for 40 days and 40 nights and being tempted to the devil. So Jesus had his fair share of fasting and praying and all that kind of stuff. But part of his mission and part of his demonstration of life was obviously also to show love. There's a normalness to Jesus. He wasn't down here just doing bare highfalutin spiritual tricks and everything was just spiritual and he was just there floating and also. No, he wanted to show that he was a real normal person. So he ate with the people, he drank with the people, he sat with the people, he lived with the people. Yes, sometimes he would do the fasting. Yes, sometimes he would do the all-night praying and all that kind of thing. But part of his ministry was to show humanness, right? So he would sit with the people, he would eat with the people. The point is that he was not communing with the people where he was becoming one of the people and behaving bad with the girl that was sexually promiscuous. Or he wasn't down there making a bond with Zacchaeus, trying to rob other people. He and Zacchaeus down in the city trying to get money from people and think. His communion or his union or his, not union, but his communion and his time spent with the sinners and so on was not him adopting their attitudes and adopting their ways and becoming contaminated and influenced by their sin. That was not his communion with the people. His communion with the people was on the other side. He was living a straight life, and his communion with the people was him encouraging them out of where they were and alongside him, encouraging Zacchaeus out of that tax collector bondage and encouraging him, look, come with me, man. Come and eat with me. Come and spend some time with me and align yourself with me. Not that he aligned himself with those people. So the commandment still stands. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 14 still stands. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial? Right? Basically, those are rhetorical questions. Those are saying light ain't got no business dealing with darkness. Servants of Christ ain't got no business dealing with servants of the devil. Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? They made no agreement there. Verse 16. And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? Okay, so all of that still stands. But that does not mean that we're to have no connection, no communion, no interaction with the people of the world. That means we are not supposed to be unequally yoked with those people. And when we say yoked, we're talking about basically you're not supposed to be aligning yourself with the Sinnerman's agenda. Right? You're not supposed to be locked into the Sinnerman in such a way that the Sinnerman has the ability and the access to derail you from your spiritual walk. Let's jump quickly to the first verse that I kind of mentioned. Let's go from verse 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, starting from verse 9. I wrote to you in my epistle not to keep company with sexually immoral people. Yet, I certainly did not mean with the sexually immoral people of this world, or with the covetous or extortioners or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of the world. But now I have written to you not to keep company with anyone named a brother who is sexually immoral or covetous or an idolater or a reviler or a drunkard or an extortioner, not even to eat with such a person. For what have I to do with judging those also who are outside. Do you not judge those who are inside? But those who are outside God judges. Therefore put away from yourselves the evil person. So this little passage here from Paul just sheds a bit more light on the situation. Paul is saying, I told you guys to be separate, right? The same ideas that we covered in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Or what agreement has light with darkness? What business has the Christian with the servant of Satan, etc. Right? Paul is saying, look, I told you guys to keep separate. But then he says, I certainly didn't mean to keep separate from all the sexually immoral people of this world, or the covetous, or the extortioners, or the idolaters, since you would need to go out of the world. Paul is recognizing clearly, look, if you go to work, you can be neck deep in sin and sin of men, because that's what men do, right? If you're not a Christian, you're a sinner. And if you're a sinner, you can be sinning. You ain't got no problem cussing. You ain't got no problem with infidelity. You ain't got no problem with immorality. You ain't got no problem ducking the work. You ain't got no problem cussing the boss behind the back. None of them things is problems. In fact, if you don't do those things, you seem odd, weird. They start asking you questions like this. Honestly, they start thinking of you as a weird kind of person. Now, deep down inside, they know that person doing the right thing, but it is so uncommon and so unusual that they look at you with suspicion. Sin of men is sin. They're not trying to keep themselves from sexual impropriety. That's not what they're trying to do. In fact, they're trying to be as sexually promiscuous as they can be without being caught, without reaping any negative repercussions for their, sexual exploits. That's what men are like without Christ, right? And I'm not saying every single man, but many, many men. That's why you have astounding participation on days like crop over and mass and so on and so forth. You have no lack of participants, no lack of volunteers, because if the name of the game is to indulge the flesh and to arouse the flesh, the sinner man there, right? I coming down there with my drink in my hand and I doing this and I doing that. You ain't gotta tell he to come down there, he coming, right? Sinner man is sin. So Paul is saying, look, you can't live in this world and not have to rub shoulders with the sinner man at some point. You can't completely avoid sinner men, right? But he's also not saying that you need to be buddy-buddy with sinner men in such a way that the sinner men have the ability to tear down your Christianity or derail your focus on Christ, right? He's saying it is impossible to avoid all sinners. That's one. Jesus is saying it is important to engage sinners, not that you aligning yourself with them, but you're inviting them to align themselves with you. Right? So basically I'm saying to you, well, let's read this verse and then let's cap it up. So this is Galatians 6. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted, right? So all of these scriptures thrown into the pot, let's just make sure that we're very clear on what we're looking at. In the world, you got people that are walking on the right path and you got people that are walking on the wrong path. We are supposed to be those walking on the right path. We're supposed to be godly, upright, God-fearing, citizens of heaven, children of God. That's us. While we are on earth, we are expected to separate ourselves from those who are walking contrary to the will of God. We are not to become attached to these kind of people. They're not supposed to be people who have the access and the attachment to our lives, that they have influence over our lives. We are not supposed to be in danger of picking up their bad habits or their bad music or their bad philosophies, their bad ideas. We're not supposed to be so close to them that they have the opportunity to contaminate us with that kind of stuff, right? However, as we walk on the earth, two things. You can't avoid unholy people altogether because that's impossible. And two, sometimes, as Jesus demonstrates, it is very important that we are present and near and in some degree of connection and communication with these same people, but not from a position of, being bound together as one and you starting to adopt their erroneous philosophies and their bad habits and bad behavior, but from the perspective that you are supposed to be able to help them out of their wayward path and invite them to align themselves with you, right? But Paul gives us some more insight. We're only supposed to be doing that if we think that we can manage it successfully without being derailed or contaminated or brought down low. So that's why Paul says, look, if you see somebody in a weaker spiritual position, let's just say for quick paraphrasing, you who are spiritual, restore that person in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted, right? So yes, we are to be separate. We're supposed to stick with holiness and we're supposed to avoid the wickedness, right? We're not supposed to be crosshair, unifying ourselves with these people and adopting their ways and their thinking. But we cannot avoid interacting with these people, because if we were to do that, we would have to leave the planet, is what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 5. He says, that's what the world is made of. Like, they're all over the place. You can't get away from the unrighteous. And then Jesus takes it a step further and says sometimes you need to actually commune with the unrighteous. But Paul gives us a little regulation on that point. He says, you who are spiritual, that is to say, if you have already beaten the covetousness and the idolatry, if you have already beaten the sexual immorality, if you have already overcome the temptation of the fat and the drinks and the marijuana, if you are no longer bound by those things, you who are spiritual, you can restore those people. You could be part of their restoration process, and you do so in a spirit of gentleness. But remember to consider your own self and your own weakness, because you might have beat cigarettes and smoking and marijuana and so on, but you may be still tempted to take a whiff and a draw. So he's saying, if you know that you're still on the fence and that you're still teetering and you still, like, it could go either way if you get on the road and cool out with Baba Roots and the fellas. Left out that. Right? Now, if you're a man like me that don't smoke, that ain't interested in no smoking and so on, it ain't gonna bother me because I ain't smoking, right? It don't matter how much marijuana that is smoking, I ain't want none because I just ain't want nothing so around me. I never do it, never was interested. That's not something that I will be tempted with. You follow what I'm saying? But if you's a man that you know that you's got little, you's got to fight that day on a regular basis, well, you try to left that out. Right? You who are spiritual, restore such an one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. And obviously Jesus is the ultimate spiritual person. Jesus was not tempted by the woman and her easy virtue and her willingness to perform sexual favors, let's say, for people. Jesus wasn't considering, being a customer. That was never a problem for Jesus. Jesus wasn't being drawn away by Zacchaeus's love for money. Jesus wasn't wrestling within himself whether or not he wanted to mistreat the people in Israel so that he can get personal financial gain. That was a temptation for Jesus. Jesus could go and sit with Zacchaeus with no fear of himself toppling over, right? And that's where we want to be. We want to have beaten the sin, beaten the habits, escaped all of the bondage, and we ourselves spiritual, free from the chains of these things. And then we have the capacity to, whenever God requires, we have the capacity to come alongside, walk right beside the sinner man and so on, without fear of falling in, but with the hope of helping them out. Hi guys, Joel Brooks here at the Insight Podcast. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video or found it informative, interesting, or helpful in any way, please give it a like and consider sharing it with your friends. If you want to stay connected, you can check us out at our website, insight.joelbrooksonline.com, and you can also check us out on social media. Links in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and God bless.